I'm Lauren with IndoorGardening.com, and today we're going to talk about the 5 easiest prayer plants. Now, I know some of you were like, easy prayer plants? What? I have heard that these are such nightmares. Prayer plants actually encompass 5 different varieties of plants. They are Geoperttia Stromanthe, Ctenathe, Maranta, and Calathea. Calathea by far are the ones that get the most notoriety for their difficulty, but there are easy specific plants in every one of these categories. Today we're going to be talking about 5 of these plants. Prayer plants are actually called prayer plants because their foliage moves up and down throughout the day in order to capture light and to facilitate water movement on their foliage. They are understory plants, so they tend to capture all of the water that falls from above and move it to wherever they need. Because of this, they are high humidity loving plants and they love to be watered. So if you have a humid home, and if you are somebody who likes to water your plants quite frequently, this will be one of those varieties for you. This is also why these plants get the notoriety for being such difficult plants. A lot of them do not like to dry out as long as other plants tend to do. For example, if you are very good with cacti and succulents, you probably will not enjoy taking care of a Calathea or a Maranta simply because they need a lot more care and attention and they grow more quickly. So with the more work, there is more reward. The first and most easiest on this particular list is going to be Maranta in general. There are red vein Maranta, there are lemon lime Maranta with green veination, there is a variegated Maranta, there's the rabbit tracks Maranta. There are quite a few varieties of these plants. They all are able to dry out for you. You will notice their leaves tend to sit a little lower and don't move up and down as often. Sometimes the foliage can feel a little bit thinner if you let them dry out a little too much. These plants, they love to be heavily watered, but then you let them dry out. They can also handle a little bit more light and will grow a little bit more quickly with more light. If you start to notice any crisping on the ends, generally it is them being underwatered or just a little too much light, so you want to give them a little bit more water if their soil is dry, and then just pull them back from the window a little bit. They do get these big, beautiful leaves. The longer you don't chop them back, the bigger the foliage will grow for you. This is one of the particular prayer plant varieties that you can chop that has nodes and you can propagate in water as well. All of the other ones on this particular list you cannot do that with. Next, we have the pinstripe Calathea. They have these big spear-shaped leaves. They are darker foliage with a bright pink veination. When they come in, they're actually a green color with this vibrant pink, and then they fade to this darker looking color, and it has almost what looks like pinstripes on them. I think they look almost like the brush strokes of a paintbrush personally. It's a very, very interesting plant. This plant does not like to dry out very often, so when it does become dry on the top, you want to make sure that you're giving it more water. This grows through corms, these big rhizomes on the bottom, and they can rot if they sit in water too long. So you want to have a well-draining mix, maybe with a little bit of sphagnum moss in there to hold some of that moisture for a little longer, but you definitely don't want them constantly sitting in water because they will rot and the foliage will fall off. But overall, it is a very fast-growing plant. It can double in size within 6 months if given the right care requirements. Another thing to note about Calathea in general and Geoperttia is they like heat. They come from a tropical environment, so hot, humid. They can handle a little bit more light as well as far as this variety of prayer plants goes. Next up, we have the Burle Ctenathe. These plants have kind of an oddly shaped foliage. They're one of the only variety of prayer plants to have a little tail at the end of their foliage. In the center, it's almost like a teeny tiny manta ray tail is kind of sticking out of the end of the foliage. It's very interesting to see. Their foliage is all green with a paler green on the bottom and a darker green on the top. It's very interesting to see the contrasting shades of green. They also do not sit very tall. They tend to be a little bit more compact and lower to the ground comparatively. And each individual plant tends to grow in more of a V-like shape instead of a circular clumping shape like other Calathea. This plant is fairly inexpensive and it grows very, very quickly. You can let it dry out. Mine has dried out completely, and it does not get the crispy tips very often. It is not super sensitive to water. You just give it whatever kind of water you have whenever it's dry, and just watch it grow. It'll grow very quickly, especially if you are in a humid and warm climate. Next up, we have Calathea Rufibarbara. This particular plant actually has fuzzy leaves. So when you touch the foliage, it'll have fuzz on it, little teeny tiny hairs that you can barely see with the naked eye. They also have a little bit on the top of the stem. This plant gets very wide and very tall, and it grows very, very quickly, especially once it is established. You can also chop off little bits of the corms. You can grow baby plants of this particular Calathea very, very easily. So you just place it in some sphagnum moss and keep it in a highly humid area, and it will grow very quickly for you. It's an incredible thing to watch. They are a lower light tolerant plant, so you don't have to give them a lot of light. If you give them more light, they will grow better for you, though. They just might lose some of that color on the backing, so that is another thing. The hairs on the foliage is actually to collect water and to protect them from the sunlight, so they can handle a little bit more light. If you mist them while you are indoors, though, keep in mind those hairs will trap that water, and you can get different bacterial and fungal infections, so this is not a plant that I would recommend misting. Calathea Orbifolia come in these bright green, vibrant leaves. They are almost circular shaped. They're absolutely gorgeous, and they have a very subtle silver green veination and variegation to them. It's really gorgeous plant, and these leaves can get huge. This plant grows quickly. It is another one of those that you can allow to dry out and water when it looks sad, essentially. Also, this is one of those plants that even if you divide it and chop it back, as long as you give it hot and humid conditions, you can let it grow. It will grow back quickly for you. The one caveat, though, is if you give it too much light, it will burn the tips of this particular plant. So just keep that in mind. It is a lower light plant. You just slowly acclimate it to that higher light until it's getting what it needs, just to prevent that burning. If the leaves do burn, though, it is a fast growing plant. You can always chop them off and see more new growth very quickly from this plant. Prayer plants get a lot of hate out there. They are not portrayed as easy care plants for the most part. A lot of new beginner plant parents become intimidated by this plant because they've heard so many horror stories from previous plant parents. And for more experienced plant parents, what we are trying to do with this video is show that there are a lot of easier care plants out there, and that you don't have to be intimidated by them. There are prayer plants out there that are going to fit your aesthetic and your caregiving needs. A lot of times the reason why prayer plants don't grow for more established plant parents is because those plant parents are used to being able to neglect their plants more, or that there is a lot of information out there that is wrong as far as prayer plant care goes. There is a lot of articles out there that say that prayer plants need to be constantly kept wet, and these ones don't. So if you constantly keep them wet, if you constantly keep them in a puddle, if you constantly try to grow them in water, essentially, instead of some type of soil, then it's not going to work. They are going to not survive for you. And I think that's where a lot of the struggle comes from. Don't forget to check out indoorgardening.com. There's lots of information there for you, and we are always happy to help. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!